Hi everyone, we will be talking about establishing individual identities, self-concepts. This slide was created by Guadalupe, Stephanie, Melissa, and Denise.
Self-concept is defined as each person's own subjective view or image of himself or herself as a person. Our self-concept is the way that we see ourselves and our own idea of what kind of person we are, not particularly our personality or how we act with others. Others are entitled to have their own opinion about the kind of person we are, but our self-concept is our own private view of ourselves. For example, others may think that I'm not very kind or that I'm a bad friend, but if I believe that I am kind to others and that I am a good friend, then that is part of my overall self-concept. This self-concept starts to develop early in our childhood as we start to develop emotions and we start to differentiate ourselves from others. As we grow and develop different ideas, beliefs, and live through experiences, our self-concept will continue to change.
Self-narrative is getting to know yourself through stories based on your experiences, shaping our self-perception. Are influenced by three elements. The first, our earliest bonding experience impacting the emotional tone of self-narrative. The more secure the level of bonding we receive as an infant, the more likely that an infant will develop optimism. This will result in a hopeful tone of self-narrative, viewing the world as good and trustworthy. An infant who has an insecure level of bonding results in a more pessimistic undertone of self-narrative, created through deception, disaster, or distrust. The second is culturally available themes and images, experiences mostly from childhood play. The stories with the villain and the hero, the movies, the books, are all images that influence us in different ways. The experiences we live mostly through our preschool years allow us to create and reinforce our self-narrative based on the perceptions we already have of the world. The third is the recurring memories and ideological of late childhood and early adolescence. As we get older, our thought process becomes more organized, therefore, we begin to have different motives depending on internal dispositions. Adolescence becomes a critical point in regards to self narrative because we question who we are, and as we begin to answer that question, construct a more concise self narrative.
Self-handicapping. It's a mechanism people use to create obstacles and excuses for themselves, so if they do poorly on a task, they can avoid blaming themselves. People use self-handicapping as a way to keep possible failure from harming their self-esteem. If you do bad in something, you can't blame yourself. You have an excuse. But if you do good in something, your self-esteem will actually go up. An example of self-handicapping, say if there is a student named Jessica, and she is a med student that is stressed out about taking an MCAT exam in 2 weeks. An MCAT is a medical college admission test. This exam will determine the course of her future. However, Jessica is a college student and is convinced that she will do horrible on the exam. Jessica's parents have been very worried about her too, and they have noticed that Jessica has not been studying lately. All Jessica has been doing is watching TV, sleeping, and partying. Jessica is self-handicapping. She knows that if she does poorly on the MCAT, then she can't blame herself. It's not her fault. It's other circumstances because of the TV shows, the sleep, and the party. Jessica is providing an excuse for expected failure and ensures her self-esteem is not affected. But if Jessica scores well on the MCAT, then it must mean she's really smart. Her circumstances were not great, but she managed to pull through. It could only be because her intellect is that high, thus boosting her self-esteem. There are consequences to this. Individuals around you will notice your actions and assume you are doing so because you have lower abilities. Some may actually end up disliking you. Self-handicapping actually increases the probability of failure.
Self-schema is cognitive process that organizes and guides self-related information. Organizational differences is one of the main ways that we do that. Each person has a dominant organizational principle, and that affects how we perceive ourselves and our social worlds. Example: someone whose organizational principle is femininity will remember moments and interactions where they show femininity. Another is through life scripts. Our organizational principles becomes a way fix of thinking about self and relating to others. Example: someone who is feminine will have memories when they are doing their makeup or dressing up and identify themselves through those memories.
Self-as behavior is when the self-understanding we bring to a situation shapes the way we communicate, and in turn, the way that we communicate can influence and revise what we think about ourselves. This means that we base our self-concept on the experiences we go through and the behavior we show to others. For example, I can think that I'm amazing at my job and work really good independently, but if I'm a sub on a task and need the help of others to complete it, that can totally change my self-concept, and I may now think that I may not be as good as I thought I was at my job. Because we are always living through experiences, our self-concept is always under construction and therefore subject to change.
Self as rational achievement. The rational self is achieved by assimilating with significant others. The rational self contains those aspects of the self-concept that are shared with relationship partners and define a person's role or position. Self-rational refers to aspects of those self-associated with one's relationship with significant others. This includes romantic partners, parents, friends. We adjust and modify our individual self-identities. Self-identities are normally displayed in given relationships. Self as internal dialogue. Personal narratives are constructed about ourselves. These take place as internal dialogue occurs. The self can be convinced in a system where we engage in intrapersonal communication. Self-talk, self-reflection, and meditation or prayer are ways of how we engage in interpersonal discourse. Self-talk's functions are forms of interpersonal communication.
Self-disclosure. Self-disclosure is the information you reveal about yourself that others are unlikely to discover from other sources. The process of deliberately revealing significant information about yourself that would not normally be known to others. There are 3 key points to this. It must be deliberate, it must be significant, and not otherwise known. By deliberate, we mean it's intentional. You are not accidentally revealing information about yourself. You're intentionally telling someone information. By significant, we mean it's not trivial information. It's important information. And it's got to be information that is not otherwise known. Self-disclosure is needed in order to have deep communication with others. In order to have interpersonal communication, this is definitely needed. Self-disclosure does involve risks. Some of the risks are, some of the revealed information can be shared with others, and you might not want that information out there. Another risk can be, by revealing your personal information, the other person has power over you, meaning they can blackmail you. And a third risk would be, by telling someone personal information, the other person might reject or disapprove of you. But self-disclosure does mean vulnerability. When you self-disclose yourself to others, it means you are opening yourself up. Examples of self-disclosures are fears, secrets, and attitudes. In conclusion, our identities are constructed in the process of communicating with others. Whether we see the self as a biographical narrative, a cognitive construct, a behavioral entity, or as several partners in a relationship with others or within our own self-system, one thing is for sure. We manage the self through messages exchanged with others. We can become more self-competent by increasing our repertoire of message options, verbal and nonverbal strategies, a working vocabulary, and the range of communicating styles we can use comfortably.